Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing His mercy and His grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, He'll prepare for us a place.
When we
all get to heaven,
what a
day of rejoicing that will be when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory. While we walk the pilgrim pathway, clouds will overspread the sky. But when traveling days are over, not a shadow, not a sign.
When we
all get to heaven,
what a
day of rejoicing that will be when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory. Let us then be true and faithful, trusting, serving every day. Just one glimpse of Him in glory will the toils of life repay.
When we
all get to heaven,
what a
day of rejoicing that will be when we all see.
We get started this evening with the material that we're going to cover. I want to read an anecdote to you that I saw this week, kind of to set the stage for why evangelism is so important and the kind of impact that it can have in lives. This is about a man I've never met. His name is Bill. He's a member of the Lord's Church somewhere in Iowa. I got this story from Wilson Adams, who preached a meeting in Iowa. And I'm just going to read this, paraphrase parts of it, read exact quotes for other parts. Wilson posted this, and he said, "This brother encourages me more than words can tell." He said he had tire trouble the week of the gospel meeting, and he brought his truck in to the shop on Bill's farm to get it repaired. And he said, "I tried to pay him, and he wouldn't take it. I tried to offer to buy him lunch, anything he would let me do." And he said, "No, we don't do things like that around here." And so a conversation ensued, and this is where I'll start reading directly. This is Bill speaking. He says, "You don't know my story. After serving in the military in Kuwait and Iraq, I came home to Iowa, left my wife, married another woman, and not only wasn't right, she got me hooked on drugs. I was going down fast, and if it weren't for a doctor getting in my face and saying if I didn't get control of my life and get off drugs, I'd be dead in 6 months, he got my attention." So Wilson said Bill made a decision. He left that woman. He got clean and has been clean now for 10 years. And this is back to quoting Bill. He said, "I changed. My first wife forgave me and we reconciled. She left the Mormon church as both of us found Jesus. If I can do it, so can others." And so Wilson wrote, "I sat in the small tent chapel church in Blockton, Iowa." There's where it is, Blockton, Iowa. I have no idea where Blockton, Iowa is. "Last night and sang with Bill as he led the singing. As I preached, Bill leaned in and spoke out loud at times when I asked questions. I love this guy." That's why this matters. 10 years ago, this man was a drug addict who was married to a woman that he had no right to be married to, that was living a profligate life. He was the epitome of the prodigal son. And because someone reached out to him, talked to him about God, talked to him about the ways of God, he, as to use his words, found Jesus. I didn't know Jesus was lost, but he found Jesus, and his life is completely different. This is not a person that we would look at and say, hey, there's a hot prospect for the gospel, let's go talk to him, while he's running around using drugs and living the way that he was living. But he was someone who listened to the message, someone who received the message implanted, someone who allowed that message to transform his thinking and to transform his life. And he turned into a faithful Christian who was engaged and interested in serving others, and a song leader. There's a picture of Bill with that post. He's an interesting looking fellow. I'd love to sit down and talk with him for a while because I think there's a lot that could be learned. Now, what stops us? What stops us from talking to people like that? Or like any people, maybe we can broaden this out and say, why do we, when we know we have the admonition to go into all the world and preach the gospel, we know that we have the obligation to, how does Timothy put it in 2 Timothy 2? These things entrust to other faithful men who can then teach others also. We know that that's the pattern, that that's what God wants, that he wants us to take the information about himself that he has revealed, that we know, and share it with other people. What's the biggest thing that gets in our way from doing that? Fear. That's absolutely right. The same thing that keeps people from being public speakers, the same thing that keeps people from trying new things, the same thing that keeps people from doing lots of different things in life is fear. Now, I'm going to get to turn Mr. Howard on. What is fear?
Mostly people think of it as an emotion. Really, it's more than that. It's not only an emotion, it's also a physical or biological response. It's also a behavioral response, what we do and how we act. But probably most importantly, that people don't realize, it's a thought. All emotions evolve from thought. Your thinking controls your emotion. Your thinking controls your fear.
Can I stop you for 1 second before you go on? Seems like I read somewhere, as a man thinks, so is he. So, yeah.
When it comes to the process of sanctification, what are we to add to our knowledge? Our self-control. So that alone tells us that knowledge of thoughts has a big impact on our self-control, meaning our emotions and our behaviors. It all starts with thoughts, faith, virtue, then knowledge.
Right.
All of which are sort of mental processes.
Which is in part why God tells us if there's anything good, if there's anything lovely, if there's anything of good repute, think on these things. Because it is when we focus on the power of God, the majesty of God, the might of God, the works of God, that we start to realize that the things that we fear are really not worth fearing. Because fear leads to avoidance, it leads to paralyzation, it leads to the unwillingness to do stuff because we're afraid. So I want to turn your attention for a moment in the discussion to Numbers chapters 13 and 14. That's the first place I want to go in the Bible to discuss these things. I'm going to probably paraphrase this more than I'm going to read. But there's a section of it that I'm sure I'll probably read. So in Numbers 13 and 14, this text recounts the Israelites' journey to explore the promised land. This is the first group, okay? They've left Egyptian bondage. They've gone to the mountain. They've received, they're traveling across, and they have now gotten to the Jordan River. It's time to go into the promised land. These are the same people that were slaves in Egypt. These people witnessed the 10 plagues that we're about to study in the Wednesday night class. These people saw God part the Red Sea. These people experienced the presence of God and the effect that that presence had on Moses. It actually came up in a discussion briefly before services tonight. When Moses came down off the mountain after having talked to God, the people were afraid of Moses. Anybody remember why? It says his face shone. And they wouldn't sit and listen to Moses until Moses put a veil over his face so they didn't have to look at it. It scared them. Okay, so these are people who had seen firsthand the power of God and the deliverance of God and the provision of God, because what else happened in the wilderness as they traveled across? Where'd they get their water from? A rock. Where'd they get their bread from? It appeared from God. It was a gift of God, a daily gift of God that had a neat characteristic about it. If you gathered too much and tried to save any of it, what happened? It spoiled and grew worms. In just one night. But because you weren't supposed to work on the Sabbath day, you gathered 2 days' worth on the sixth day, and that extra measure stayed good overnight, all the next day, provided them food. Now, this is the same stuff that any other night would have rotted by morning. Now they're eating on it the next day, and it's perfectly good, and just like it was the day before, because that's the way that God determined that it should be. And so they had seen the provision of God and the power of God and the breadth of God's power. And they get to the river at the promised land, and they're a little hesitant. And so Moses sends 12 spies into the land, one from each tribe, to assess the situation. And they come back and they say, yeah, it's a rich land. The poetic language of the scripture is it's a land that flows with milk and honey. That's just simply saying that there's plenty of life there. There's plenty of sustenance there. The bunches of grapes are described as being so great that it takes 2 people to carry one. And so they come back and they say, yeah, it's a rich land. But 10 of the 12 spies express fear because the inhabitants of that land are big. And in fact, the language is, we appear as but grasshoppers in their sight. Joshua and Caleb are 2 of those 12, but Joshua and Caleb urged to have faith in God's promise. They said, God told us we can take the land, we can take the land. God told us that it's ours, it's ours. We don't have to worry about how big they are. We don't have to worry about how formidable they are. God is with us. And after all, he had done all of these things and displayed his power and his majesty and his might and his willingness to help. But what happened with the people? Well, they listened to the words of the 10 who were afraid, and those 10 spies' fear got transferred into the heart of the people, and they rebelled. And just here is where I want to read a little bit. Look at chapter 14 of Numbers, and start with me in verse 1. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or that we would have died in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? They said to one another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Fear consumed them. All they had to do was do what God instructed them to do, but because of fear, they refused. Now, what happened to these people? It's the subject of the balance of the rest of this book. God waited for this entire generation to die. Two of them entered into the promised land. Everyone else, including Moses, died. And they died in the wilderness apart from the land that had been promised them. And there's a story in that for us. And we spent a while studying this book, so I won't belabor that too much, other than just to say that this whole thing is a model of our life and walk with God. If we follow God and do what He says, then we will be successful and He'll provide for us and we'll enter into the promise. If we rebel against God and in fear refuse to do what He has instructed us to do, we wander aimlessly in the wilderness until we die apart from the promise, which isn't a good thing when you make spiritual application of that. Because our promise isn't about a piece of real estate in the Middle East. Our promise is about our souls in heaven. We don't want to die apart from receiving that promise, but fear could very easily keep us from it. Another passage to consider, and this one we touched on at the very end of the class last time, the book of Isaiah, if you'll turn with me. Chapter 41. And let's look starting in verse 8. But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the offspring of Abraham, my friend, you whom I took from the ends of the earth and called from its farthest corners, saying to you, you're my servant, I have chosen you and not cast you off. Fear not, I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous hand. Now, question. What does it mean, therefore, if we allow fear to prevent us from doing the things that God has asked us to do? Okay, I think that's an excellent answer, but let's flesh that out a little bit. What does it mean to have little faith? Let's put this in real simple layman's common sidewalk language. Lack of trust, a lack of confidence. It does definitely limit you. Basically, listen, you're saying, God, you're a liar. When you don't act as though you believe, listen, fear not, I am with you. Okay, if God is with us, who can defeat us? Who can prevent us from accomplishing the things that He has asked us to do? How big the people are. See, Caleb and Joshua got it right. How big the people are in that land don't matter. God's with us. And so we don't have to worry about how big they are, how strong they are, how great their army is. God has said He's with us and we get the land, and so we need to go take it. They believed God and were ready to act on that belief. I am with you. I will strengthen you. Well, does God mean that? Is he going to give us the strength? I'm sorry? He means it. But if I live as though he doesn't mean it, what is that saying, even though I may not use the words? That I believe God lied. That he's not really going to give me the strength. I will help you. Is God going to help us? Now, I think there's something else worth talking about very briefly here, because a lot of us don't seem to really understand the idea of someone helping us. We think that when someone's going to help us do something, a lot of times that means that they're going to do it for us. That is not helping us. Children are bad about this. You say, here, I'll help you pick up, and they expect you to pick everything up. No, I said I would help you. I'm here to help. I'm not here to do it for you. God is not going to do it for us, but he has promised to help us. If we don't believe that he is actually going to do that, and so we don't do what he has asked us to do because we don't believe we can do it, then we are effectively saying to him, no, you're lying. You're not really going to help us. You said you're going to help us, but you're not. I'm with you. Do not be dismayed. I'm your God. I'll strengthen you. I'll help you. I'll uphold you with my righteous right hand. Is God going to hold us up? Yes. Anybody else that answers the question, I want the same enthusiasm. And if you say amen, I want that enthusiasm too. Go ahead.
It isn't going to disappear overnight.
It is not.
We are not built like a machine. There's no way. So it takes time, practice, initiative, and a change in your thought pattern over time to overcome your fear. One thing about fear is you don't let fear control you. You fear it, but you can still accomplish a lot. Fear immobilize you, paralyze you.
I'm glad you brought that up because it lets me actually use the few minutes that I watched the Masters this afternoon. I get to use something that I heard on that as this tournament's got the best golfers in the world playing in it. And these guys, when you watch them play, you think that they are fearless. And they were interviewing one of the guys that was in the top 5 yesterday. And they replayed a section of that interview today in the coverage. And he was asked about being nervous, and he said, of course I'm nervous. But I've learned to use that. And so instead of it being debilitating to him, it became a help. That does not happen overnight. That happened through a lot of effort and training and diligence and practice. And that is what the Bible tells us to do spiritually. Who through practice have their senses trained to discern between good and evil. Train the young men to love their wives and to do this and to do that. Train the younger women to be this way and that way in Titus. Training, absolutely essential in this area as well. Everyone is going to experience fear. What my knowledge of God enables me to do is realize that I'm not alone. And we're going to see some examples of that in a moment. But before we look into those, go to Philippians chapter 4 for just a moment with me. Philippians 4, verses 6 and 7. And I want you to listen to how it's put here. And again, keep in mind what Mr. Howard just pointed out. This isn't overnight. This doesn't happen automatically. I can't just read the words that I'm fixing to read here and go, oh, okay, and then toss all my fear away. This is an ideal. And this is what it looks like when faith is guiding my thoughts, my intents, my purpose, and my walk. When every part of my being is guided by faith. For we walk by faith and not by sight. When that is the case, listen, do not be anxious about anything. But in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. You notice that the end of that is the reason why I don't have to be anxious about anything is because I know I'm not alone. Because I know God is there and I know God is listening. And I know His righteous right hand is going to be right there with me to uphold me. When I have something that causes me fear and therefore am led to be anxious, I don't face it by myself. I go in prayer to God, who I know is right there with me, having promised to strengthen me, having promised to uphold me, having promised to give me success. And I make my requests known to Him. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. I'm not real sure what that phrase, which surpasses all understanding, which is set off by commas in my translation. The translators view it as a parenthetical statement that's kind of describing the things. I don't know exactly what all it means, but I do know this. It's saying that this doesn't look normal. This is describing those people who look like, and he said, we're not machines. We're not. But you know, there's people that look like machines, well-trained, skilled people at things who it seems like they're just nothing. They're unflappable. Nothing affects them, and everything they do always works. It's the confidence and the knowledge and the trust working together. They did not. And we have an advocate. And it just so happens that the guy who's standing beside us with his righteous right hand, ready to lift us up if we fall, is the guy who spoke the universe into existence. I think I mentioned this in passing last month when we had this study. I'm not sure. By the way, I have no idea what time it is because that clock says it's 7 minutes after 5. I like that clock. I think I mentioned this. We let fear interfere with our ability to talk to somebody. So we walk along and we see somebody, we say, you know, I probably ought to talk to them. I probably ought to bring this subject up with them. Ask them about faith. Ask them about God. Ask them what. But I'm afraid to talk to them. I don't know them, and the situation's a little uncomfortable, and I don't know how they're going to react, and so I'm afraid to say anything, and so I sit there and say nothing. But I pray to God every day. Do you realize I'm talking to the creator of the universe, and I'm afraid to talk to a man? Think about that for a minute. What human being even comes close to the majesty, the greatness, the grandeur, the power, or the purity, the holiness of God? And the answer is none. None of us even come close. None is righteous, no, not one. Right. But if it's something that we have been asked to do, and if He has promised that He's going to be there with us when we do it, do we have anything to fear in the unknown? Yes, ma'am.
It's not fear. I think sometimes it's selfishness because you don't want to lower yourself and become a matter right then and there that people start gossiping about you. And I think
Oh, yeah. This is just one of the things that gets in the way. It's probably the biggest thing. And I'm not going to embarrass anyone and say, hey, raise your hand if you've ever talked to anybody about God. But I can tell you this, the first time you do it, you might walk away going, why did I say that? Feeling like a complete imbecile because you said something that as you walk away and you say, that was silly. Why did I say that? That's fear. Affecting your ability to think and affecting your judgment and all the other things. But it gets easier. It gets easier, and you're not judged on the skill level that you have the first time you do it. You know what you're judged on? Whether or not you're willing to let a soul walk past you without care about honoring God or the impact of their ignorance on their soul. Now, they may not be ignorant, by the way. You might be surprised. You might start talking to somebody and they might go, and this has happened. This has actually happened to me. I've approached someone, started talking to someone, and say, oh, I was raised in the Church of Christ. And then you go, really? And you find out that they actually know a lot of stuff. So you never know, and you never know the effect you're going to have, but one day somebody talked to Bill, and it changed not only his life, but it changed his wife's life, and affected the entire body that meets in Brockton, Iowa. And it touched Wilson Adams' life, and it just is, whoever did that encouraged a lot of people and changed people's lives eternally. And so it's a terrifying thing when you think that my timidity allows myself to fail to do. Listen, God really hadn't asked us to do too much, has he? In the grand scheme of things, what has God asked us to do? To pursue the knowledge and understanding of his will, to try to live godly and treat people in righteous ways, and to share this message with other people. That's pretty much all he's asked us to do. Now, it has a huge impact on what we do and how we talk and all those kinds of things, but what he's working, it's one of the two prongs. Living righteous is one prong, and then sharing the message with others. That's the two prongs of following Christ. How can we just ignore one of them? And yet often that's what we do. And one of the big reasons we do that is because we're afraid. We're afraid of what someone's going to say or what might happen or the unknown. We don't know. You're right, we don't. And you might actually get tied up in a conversation at some point where you walk off realizing, wait a minute, you know what? I just got made to look foolish because they showed me I didn't know what I was talking about. I talked to a preacher one time that left a conversation with a lady that he had started about the gospel. And he said, she cleaned my clock. He said, in fact, I immediately went to visit another gospel preacher and said, I don't know what I'm doing. That happens. But you know what that's telling me? I need to study more. There's stuff yet for me to learn. And I need to, and by the way, there's no end to the things that are going to come to you from other people. Ideas or line of reasoning or arguments about God, or there's no end to the things that you're going to be confronted with. You will always be confronted for the first time with something and not have an answer for it. And have to say, you know what, I'm going to have to look into that and get back with you because I have no idea. And that's a little embarrassing if it's all about trying to make myself look good. But if it's all about searching for the truth of God, it's not embarrassing at all. You know what we ought to be doing for those people? Telling them thank you. Telling them thank you for helping us. And that we can learn together. Let's learn about this together. Because I don't know anything about that. And that's another encumbrance that we'll talk about later. But man, it can't be fear. The psalmist in the 56th Psalm, verses 1 through 4, be gracious to me, O God, for man tramples on me all day long. My attacker oppresses me. My enemies trample on me all day long, for many attack me proudly. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. There's the answer. When I am afraid, I put my trust in God. In God, whose word I praise, in God I trust, I shall not be afraid. What can flesh do to me? Now, to be sure, there are a great many Christians throughout history who found out exactly what flesh can do to you. What can flesh do to us? They can kill the body. They can kill us. Stephen found that out. Jesus found that out. Paul and the other apostles found that out for the most part, save John. The prophets found that out. There's a lot of people who found out what man can do to us. But Jesus said, don't fear the one who can kill the body but has no power over your soul. Instead, fear the one who can destroy both body and soul. And so we have to start thinking about this. And as Howard pointed out at the beginning, fear begins with a thought. So that means if I want to overcome fear, it begins with me going, you know something? This is not something I ought to be afraid of. This is not something that ought to be a hindrance. And when we start thinking that way, then slowly it will change the way that we perceive the world, change the way that we look at possible opportunities, change our behavior, and transform us. Absolutely transform us into the image that God would have us to be. Acts 8. I'm going to skip a little bit. I'm running out of time, I think. I got 10 minutes till the hour's up, so I got about 3 more before I got to quit talking. Acts chapter 8. But Saul was ravaging the church and entering house after house. He dragged off men and women and committed them to prison. All right, this is a situation that is about as fearful as it can get. To be a Christian at this point in time and to profess your faith publicly, to talk to other people about it, to be known to be of the way, this is what it got you. Dragged off, tossed into prison, ultimately convicted of heresy and condemned to death. But notice what it says in verse 4. Those who were scattered went about preaching the word. Now, they weren't stupid. They didn't hang around in Jerusalem. They left, but they didn't stop talking to people about it. If anybody had an excuse to be quiet, they had an excuse to be quiet, but they didn't. Why not? Well, the obvious answer is they believed God. The second one is like unto it. They loved men more than themselves. They were willing to die. Be ye faithful even unto death, and I'll give your crown of righteousness. They were willing to allow that to happen to their flesh. If that's what had to happen to their flesh, they were not willing to keep the gospel to themselves. 1 Samuel 17 is another place you can go. That's a a great chapter about David. David goes out in fact, let's go over there real quick. Chapter 17, I'm just going to read a few verses starting in verse 31. When the words of David spoke were heard, David has basically at this point said, hey, just why isn't somebody out there fighting Goliath? If nobody wants to do it, I'll do it. When the words of David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him, and David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him. You're but a youth. He's been a man of war from his youth. There's the seeds of fear and doubt being planted. The king telling this young man, you can't do that. Listen to what he says. Your servant used to keep the sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb of the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And he arose against me. I caught him by his beard, struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them. Did he think he was that good of a fighter? Listen to what he says. For he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. David didn't think for a minute that it was his strength that gave him success in the field with the lion and with the bear. And he didn't think for a minute it was his strength that was going to give him success over this Philistine. He wasn't afraid of this giant, literal giant, because he knew God was with him. David applied the attitude that we read in Isaiah 41. He applied that to himself and said, you know what? God is standing there in the righteous right hand of the Almighty God is going to uphold me, and I'm going to go into battle. And this is an uncircumcised Philistine who is taunting God. And God's going to allow me victory. We read the same kind of an attitude in Daniel 3 with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I love that story even better because when push comes to shove, they recognize that they might not be delivered by God. But even if God didn't deliver them from the fire, it was still worthy to be faithful and do what he told them to do. And it was a fourth person appeared in the fire with them. One is like the Son of God, the text says. God was right there with them in the fire. By the way, I like to tell people, he didn't deliver them from the fire. They had to go into the fire. But he did deliver them from harm. Daniel 6 recounts the story of Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel lived under a time when the king was tricked into passing a decree that if you worshiped anything or anyone for 30 days except for the king, that you had to be tossed into a lion's den. All right, here we go. Look, 30 days, that's all I have to do. 30 days, I'm not going to pray. For 30 days, I'm going to skip praying. And then on the 31st day, I could pray again because I have met and I don't have to fear anymore. But you know what Daniel said? I'm not going to stop praying to God. And he went through his regular routine and he prayed 3 times a day as he had always prayed. And so his enemies were there waiting for him. And he gets tossed into the den of lions. But God protects him. He comes out unharmed the next morning. Daniel was a man who believed that God was with him and that God would give him success and that he would get strength from God, whatever that meant. And it doesn't always mean that you come out of the den without being scratched, because many of God's prophets met a horrible fate. Many of God's children in the first century met a horrible fate. Read the end of Hebrews chapter 11. It doesn't always mean that you come out unscathed, but it always means that God is there, and it always means that what needs to come to pass is going to come to pass. Do I really need to be afraid to talk to someone about their soul? And the answer is no, I don't really need to. I can have faith, but I have to work on it. And I have to develop it. And I have to look for the opportunities. And at first, they can be small. We have those little invitation cards. At first, it's nothing more than just handing somebody a card and saying, we'd love for you to come to services. We meet at 5 o'clock on Sunday evenings. If you're free next Sunday, why don't you come? With your name and your telephone number written on the back of it, saying if you have any questions, or if I can help you in any way between now and then, give me a call. It can start that easy. It can start even easier than that. You can share with someone a link to a sermon from the YouTube page or the Facebook page, if that's all that you can muster the courage to do. But if you do that and you continue to work on this and you continue to discipline yourself, I promise the day's coming when you're going to say, you know what? Mike's not saying it the way I want it said. Mike's not touching this person as effectively on a video as I will be if I'm sitting across the table from this individual that I've just met and talking to them from my heart. And then fun stuff gets to start happening. You get to see people's lives start to change. And you get to see faith begin to grow. And one day you'll be talking to one of those people and they'll say, yeah, I want to do this. I want to be baptized. And then you get to come down here and open the building up and baptize someone into Christ. And that'll change your life forever. I think I remember every single person I've ever baptized. I think. If I don't remember them, I forgot them. I think I do. I know I remember the first one. And most everyone, I think I do. It can't be described. It can't be described. Anybody have any questions or comments? I need to stop, even though it's only 23 after. This is so important, and it's so important to the health of this local church that we are at least sowing the seed in this community. Whether or not that seed grows, that's not for us to worry about. But I'm telling you, if people are being lost because we're not sowing the gospel, that is something we have to be worried about. And if we're honest with ourselves, we're probably not doing enough of this. Although I have to say, I've seen people do it with my own eyes. People sitting in this room, I've seen them do it. So I know it's going on some. For those of you that have been doing it, great. Excel still more. And for the rest of us, what are we waiting for? I got to stop. Thanks for your participation and comments, and we'll do this again next month if the Lord wills.
Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing His mercy and His grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, He'll prepare for us a place. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory.